I was driving the state truck west on Highway 278 when the daylight started to go. Still had dust caked on my boots from the last washout check. Still had the taste of bad coffee from the thermos I'd killed around noon. The road was that kind of empty you get in February when nobody's heading anywhere good and the snow's mostly gone. But the cold hasn't quit. Christine rode shotgun with her camera bag wedged between her feet. She'd been quiet for maybe 20 m, which wasn't unusual anymore. What was unusual was how she kept leaning forward every few minutes to point out turnoffs I barely noticed. There, she said, that one. I glanced right. Dirt track disappearing into sage brush and rock. Could have been a logging road, could have been nothing. What about it? Old digging, 1870s probably. I looked at her. She was still staring at the turnoff even though we'd passed it. How do you know that? She didn't answer, just settled back in her seat and pulled the camera bag onto her lap, fingers working at the zipper like she was checking something inside for the third or fourth time that hour. I kept driving. Thing was, Christine knew her stuff. She worked documentation for the historical survey, spent most of her time cataloging mining claims and railroad spurs that didn't exist anymore. Made sense she'd recognize old sites. What didn't make sense was the way she said it, like she was tracking something, like those abandoned diggings were calling to her, and she was just marking where they were. Another one, she said a few miles later. Left side. I saw it this time. Faint ruts heading up toward a ridge line, couple of weathered posts that might have been a gate once. You've been out here before. No. Then how? I just know. She turned to look at me, and her eyes had that flat quality they'd had for weeks now. I can feel them. I didn't say anything to that. Wasn't much to say. The sun was dropping behind the Beaverhead Range, turning everything orange and cold at the same time. I had the heater running, but it wasn't doing much. Christine didn't seem to notice. She was wearing the same field jacket she always wore, same boots, but both of them looked too big on her now. That was the other thing I couldn't ignore. She'd lost weight, not the kind you lose from skipping a meal or two. The kind that comes off slow and steady because you're not eating right and you're not sleeping and something's grinding you down from the inside. Her face was sharper than it used to be. Cheekbones standing out, shadows under her eyes that makeup didn't cover anymore, and the ring was gone. She'd been engaged last fall. Some guy but who worked it and wore fleece vests and seemed fine. I guess normal. I'd met him twice maybe. Didn't leave much of an impression either way. But Christine had worn that ring every day. Silver band with a small stone, and she used to twist it when she was thinking. Now her left hand was bare, had been for a month. I hadn't asked about it, wasn't my business, and Christine didn't invite questions. We worked together, rode in the same truck most days, split gas station sandwiches on long drives. That didn't mean we talked about personal stuff, but I noticed. How much further, she asked. To where? Bannock. I frowned, wasn't planning on stopping there. We should. It's a ghost town, Christine State Park. Nothing's open this time of year. I know what it is. She had her phone out now. No signal, but she was looking at something she'd pulled up earlier. A map. Maybe we should stop. Why? I need to see it. That phrase again. Need, not want. She'd been using it a lot lately. I need to check that archive. I need to drive out to Argenta. I need to see the old survey maps like she didn't have a choice. I glanced at the dashboard, quarter tank of gas. We had enough to get back to Dillon if we turned around in the next hour. If we detoured to Bannock and poked around a ghost town in the cold, we'd be cutting it close. It'll be dark soon, I said. I know, and cold. Leon. She looked at me, and there was something in her expression I didn't like. Urgency maybe, or certainty. Please. I should have said no. Should have told her we had a schedule and a job, and no reason to wander off into a historical site that had been abandoned for 150 years. Should have reminded her that the state truck wasn't for personal detours, and I wasn't getting written up because she had a hunch about old mines. But she'd said please, and Christine didn't say please very often. Fine, I said, 20 minutes, then we're gone. She nodded and turned back to the window. I took the turn off about 10 mi later just as the sun hit the horizon. The road to Bannock was paved at first, then gravel, then something that might have been gravel once, but was mostly just frozen dirt and potholes. The truck rattled over it fine. We drove past the entrance sign, Bannock State Park, established 1962. Winter hours vary, and followed the road as it curved down toward the buildings. The town sat in a shallow valley, wooden structures lined up along a main street that probably looked the same as it did in 1863. Most of the buildings were intact, preserved by the state and the dry cold. Hotel Me stood tallest, 3 stories of gray wood with a porch running the length of it. Beside it was the old Masonic Hall, then a row of cabins and storefronts, then the courthouse at the far end. And parked right in front of Hotel Me was a rental SUV. White Chevy Tahoe, Montana plates, both front doors standing wide open. Nobody around. I slowed the truck and rolled into the lot, gravel crunching under the tires, pulled up maybe 30 FT from the SUV and put us in park. The engine ticked in the quiet. That's weird, I said. Christine was already staring at it. Someone's here. Doesn't look like it. Both doors open meant someone had gotten out in a hurry, or they'd been sitting there with the doors open and then walked off. Either way, it was stupid. Temperature was dropping fast now that the sun was almost gone, maybe 20 degrees, and leaving your doors open in February was a good way to kill your battery and freeze your interior. I scanned the street, didn't see anyone. No movement in the buildings, no footprints in the patches of snow between the boardwalks. The whole place was dead quiet in that way ghost towns get when the wind drops and there's nothing alive to make noise. Stay here, I said. I climbed out of the truck and the cold hit me right away. Pulled my work jacket tighter and walked toward the SUV, boots loud on the gravel. Christine's door opened behind me. I said, "Stay, I'm coming." I didn't argue, wasn't worth it. The SUV was new, maybe a 2023 rental, still had that chemical smell inside, air freshener and plastic. Keys were in the ignition, engine off. I leaned in and checked the dash. Gas was at half. Nothing on the seats except a wadded-up Subway wrapper and a half-empty water bottle in the cup holder. Glove box was closed. I popped it. Rental agreement, insurance card, couple of napkins. The name on the agreement was Susan Riley. Address in Bozeman. Anything. Christine was standing a few feet back, arms wrapped around herself, scanning the buildings. Rented to someone from Bozeman, that's it. Where are they? No idea. I stepped back and looked around. The street ran maybe 200 yards, buildings on both sides, everything boarded up or locked. If Susan Riley had gotten out of her SUV and gone exploring, she could be in any of them. Or she could have walked the trails behind the town up toward the old cemetery or the mine shafts in the hills. But you don't leave your doors open when you go for a walk. You lock up and take your keys. Maybe they're in one of the buildings. Christine said maybe. She was already moving toward Hotel Me, that same purposeful walk she'd had for weeks. Not hesitant, not curious, just certain. Christine. She kept going, stepped up onto the porch and tried the door. Locked. Moved to the window and cupped her hands to look inside. I turned back to the truck to grab my flashlight. And that's when I felt it. Not heard it, felt it. The air had changed. Gone heavier maybe, or just still in a way that didn't match the valley. I looked east toward the entrance road, and the gate was still open. The metal arch with the park name on it just visible in the fading light. My phone was in my pocket. I pulled it out. No signal. That was normal out here, but I checked anyway. Nothing. Leon. Christine was waving me over to the side of Hotel Me, where a narrow gap led back toward the rear of the buildings. I walked over, gravel giving way to hard, packed dirt, and she pointed down the gap. Footprints, fresh ones, pressed into a thin layer of snow that hadn't melted yet. Boot treads decent size, leading away from the street toward the back lots. Someone walked through here, she said. Recently, we should follow them. I looked at the prints, then at Christine, then back toward our truck. The state-issue Ford 250 parked with the nose facing out, ready to leave. Smart parking. That's what I always did. Block the wind, face the exit, be ready to move. Except now the idea of leaving felt urgent in a way I couldn't explain. Let's go, I said. We walked back to the truck and I climbed into the driver's seat, turned the key. Nothing. Dashboard stayed dark. No lights, no chime, no dash glow. I tried again. The starter didn't even click. What's wrong? Christine was in the passenger seat, door still open. Battery's dead. It was fine 2 minutes ago. I know. I popped the hood and got out, walked around front and lifted it. Battery terminals looked fine, cables tight. No corrosion, no loose connections. I checked the alternator belt. Fine, everything looked fine. I got back in and tried the key again. Nothing. My phone was still in my hand. I checked it again. Still no signal. I switched to the radio. The state band unit mounted under the dash. Turned it on. Static, just hiss and crackle. No voices, no emergency band, nothing. I cycled through the channels, all static. Leon. Christine was looking past me out the driver's side window toward the entrance road. The gate was closed. I stared at it. Big metal gate, the kind that swings across the road on a manual hinge. It had been open when we drove in. I'd seen it. 30-foot span of tube steel painted green, standing wide to let vehicles through. Now it was shut, latched across the road like someone had walked over and swung it closed and locked it. Did you see anyone? I asked. No. I opened my door and stepped out. The air was colder now, or maybe I just felt it more. I walked toward the gate, boots loud again, breath fogging in front of me. Nobody there. No park ranger, no caretaker, no Susan Riley from Bozeman. Just the gate closed and latched and the road beyond it disappearing into the hills. I grabbed the latch and pulled, locked solid. Behind me, Christine was still sitting in the truck, door open, staring at the buildings. The town had just locked us in. I stood there at the gate for probably 30 seconds just looking at that latch. Solid steel, the kind of hardware you can't force without tools I didn't have. The padlock wasn't even rusted. Clean brass, newer than the gate itself. Christine's voice came from behind me. Leon. I turned. She was still by the truck, but she'd stepped out now, both hands on the open door. We need to check the SUV, she said. I need to figure out how we're getting out of here. Check the SUV first, she wasn't asking. That tone had been showing up more the past few weeks. Flat, certain, the way you'd tell someone the sky was blue. I walked back across the frozen dirt. My breath came out white. The temperature was dropping fast now that the sun was down, maybe 15 degrees, the kind of cold that finds every gap in your jacket. There's a reason it's here, Christine said when I got close. There's a reason the doors are open. Yeah, someone left in a hurry. Or they wanted us to look. That bugged me a little the way she said it, but she wasn't wrong about needing to check. If someone was stranded out here, injured, maybe we had a responsibility. I pulled the mag light from my belt and clicked it on. The beam cut white across the Tahoe's interior. I stepped up to the driver's side first. The door was cold when I touched it, metal sucking the heat right out of my palm. I leaned in and swept the light across the front seats. Subway wrapper on the dash, same one I'd seen before. Water bottle in the cup holder, maybe a third full. The rental agreement was still visible in the glove box. That name in block letters, Susan Riley. I moved the beam to the back. Diaper bag, navy blue with yellow ducks printed on the side, sitting upright on the seat behind the driver, the kind with a dozen pockets and a changing pad that rolls out. One of the side pouches was unzipped, and I could see the corner of a pack of wipes inside. My stomach dropped a little. I shifted the light lower. On the floorboard behind the passenger seat was a small cooler, the soft-sided kind, red fabric. The zipper was halfway open, and I could see the corner of a juice box inside, the foil pouch kind. The ice had mostly melted. There was a dark water stain spreading across the carpet underneath. "What is it?" Christine asked. She was right behind me. I hadn't heard her walk up. "Family," I said. "She's got a kid with her." Christine leaned past my shoulder, looking in. She didn't say anything. I pulled back and moved around to the passenger side, boots crunching on the frozen ground. The door was open wider here, angled out about 60 degrees. I aimed the light at the seat. A wallet, brown leather, women's style, sitting right in the middle of the passenger seat, like someone had placed it there deliberately. Not dropped, placed. I reached in and picked it up. The leather was cold and stiff. I flipped it open. Driver's license in the clear sleeve. Montana State ID. The photo showed a woman with shoulder-length brown hair smiling the way everyone does in DMV pictures, polite, but not quite real. The name read Susan Marie Riley. Address in Bozeman. Date of birth made her 29. The license didn't expire for another 2 years. "Susan Riley," I said mostly to myself. Christine was at my elbow now, close enough I could hear her breathing. Short, shallow pulls. I checked the other slots in the wallet. Debit card, credit card, insurance card, grocery store rewards card, $17 in cash, a 10, a 5 and 2 ones. Everything you'd expect, everything normal. I closed the wallet and set it back on the seat. That's when I saw the windshield. At first I thought it was just dirt, a smudge from someone's hand. But when I angled the flashlight up, the mark caught the light different, greasy, deliberate. A circle maybe 6 in across, drawn in what looked like finger marks, the lines thick and uneven and running through the middle of the circle. Top to bottom, a single straight line. I stared at it for a few seconds. The grease had an odd sheen to it, yellowish under the flashlight beam. "You see that?" I asked. "Yes." "What is it?" Christine stepped closer, her head tilting as she studied the symbol. Her face was hard to read in the dim light, but I caught something in her expression. Recognition, maybe. "It's a miner's mark," she said. "For what?" "Bad air," she said it quiet. "Matter of fact, they draw it at a tunnel mouth or a shaft opening warning for the next crew. It means there's gas or something else that could kill you before you knew it was there." I looked back at the greasy circle. The line cut straight through the middle, clean and deliberate. "How do you know that?" I asked. "I just do." There it was again, that certainty. I didn't push it. I stepped back from the SUV and swept the flashlight in a slow arc across the ground. The beam picked up our boot prints from earlier, the tread marks clear in the thin layer of snow. But there were others, too. Older, maybe harder to make out in the dark. Something felt wrong. Not just the mark on the windshield, the whole setup. Wallet left on the seat, doors wide open, keys still in the ignition. I circled around the back of the Tahoe, keeping the light low. My breath was coming faster now, white clouds hanging in the air. The rear tires were on the far side, driver's side, rear first. I crouched down and aimed the beam at the rubber. The tire was flat, completely flat. The sidewall sagging against the frozen dirt, but it wasn't a puncture from a nail or a blowout from driving. There was a cut, clean, horizontal, maybe 4 in long, starting low on the sidewall where you wouldn't see it unless you were looking. The rubber was still shiny along the edges of the cut, fresh. I moved to the passenger side rear. Same thing, flat tire, clean slash, low to the ground, deliberate. My chest tightened. I stood and walked back toward the state truck, faster now. Christine followed without a word. When I got to the driver's side, I dropped to one knee and shined the light at the front tire. Flat. The cut was identical. Low on the sidewall, clean edges, rubber, still wet looking where it had been sliced. I moved to the rear tire on the same side. Same thing. "Leon." Christine's voice was tight. "I see it." I stood up and checked the other side. Both tires on the passenger side were fine, still holding air. Whoever did this had only cut 2 per vehicle, just enough to make sure we weren't going anywhere. I straightened up and turned in a slow circle, scanning the buildings with the flashlight. The beam hit the side of Hotel Me, the gray wood soaking up the light. Nothing moved. No sound except the wind starting to pick up, a low whistle through the gaps in the storefronts. Whoever did this was still here, had to be. The cuts were too fresh, the rubber still shining, and they'd done it while we were standing right here, maybe while I was at the gate or checking the SUV the first time. That meant they were close, watching. Maybe the thought made my skin crawl. I clicked off the flashlight. My eyes needed a second to adjust, but I didn't want to give anyone a target to follow. "We need to," Christine started. The bell cut her off. It came from somewhere up the street past Hotel Me, a single metallic clang, low and hollow. The kind of sound an old bell makes when the clapper hits rust. I froze. Another clang, then another. Slow at first, maybe one every 2 seconds, deliberate, then faster. The rhythm picked up, the clangs coming quicker, overlapping now until it wasn't individual strikes anymore, but a continuous ringing, high and sharp and wrong. It climbed in pitch, turning into a siren that made my teeth hurt, the kind of sound that gets inside your skull and won't let go. I grabbed Christine's arm. "We need to move." She didn't resist. Her eyes were locked on the street, on the buildings where the sound was coming from. The siren kept going, rising and falling now in waves. It bounced off the storefronts, echoing back on itself until I couldn't tell where it was coming from anymore. Then I saw it. Movement between 2 buildings on the left side of the street, maybe 50 yards up. Just a flicker at first, pale against the dark wood. I clicked the flashlight back on and aimed it. A face pale, too pale, white enough to catch the beam and throw it back. The eyes didn't reflect right, flat and colorless. No pupils I could see, just white. It didn't move, just stood there in the gap between the buildings, staring. I grabbed Christine harder, pulling her toward me. "We're leaving now." I pulled Christine toward the entrance road. Her arm felt thin under my grip, thinner than it should have been. The siren kept climbing and falling behind us, and I didn't look back at whatever that face was between the buildings. Just moved. "Come on," I said. She didn't fight me. That should have been good, but it wasn't. She just followed, her boots crunching the frozen dirt at the same pace as mine. The gate was still closed when we got there. Same green painted steel tube blocking the road. But when I got closer, I saw the chain. It was looped through the gate frame and wrapped around the support post on the right side. Bright silver links, thick as my thumb. The kind of chain you'd use to secure heavy equipment or a livestock trailer. It caught the last bit of daylight and practically glowed. There was a padlock threaded through the end links. Also new, also silver. The keyhole was clean. No scratches, no dirt. I stopped 2 FT from it, and Christine stopped beside me. "That wasn't there before," I said. She didn't answer. I'd been at this gate maybe 10 minutes ago, 15 at most. The latch had been locked, but there had been no chain. I was sure of it. I would have noticed a chain that bright. I reached out and grabbed it with both hands. Cold bit through my work gloves. I yanked hard, pulling the chain taut between the gate and the post. It didn't give, didn't rattle, didn't shift even a 4-inch. I pulled again, planting my boots and using my shoulders. Nothing. The links were solid, and the padlock held tight. I let go and stepped back. My breath came out in white clouds. "Someone's doing this," I said. "Someone's here." Christine tilted her head, not looking at me, looking past the gate down the access road that led back to the highway. Her expression was calm, too calm. "Christine," she turned. "There's a landline." "What?" "In one of the tour buildings. They have to have a phone for emergencies." I stared at her. "You're not surprised about what? The chain, the gate, any of this?" She blinked slow. "We need to find a phone." The siren was still going behind us. That rising, falling wail that didn't sound mechanical anymore. It sounded wet. I don't know how else to describe it. Christine started walking back toward the main street. Not fast, just steady. "Christine, wait." She kept going. I looked at the chain one more time. Thought about trying to climb the gate, but it was a good 8 FT tall, and the top had a crossbar that would make it awkward. And even if I got over, then what? Leave Christine here. Run 5 miles in the dark to the highway and hope someone drove past. I figured she was right about the phone. If this was a state park with tour buildings and visitor services, there had to be a landline somewhere. Even if the office was locked, I could break a window, get inside, call for help. No clean choices. I turned and followed her back toward the truck. The state Ford sat where we'd left it, 2 flat tires on the driver's side, sagging low. I went to the back and dropped the tailgate. The metal clanged and the siren seemed to answer it, rising higher for a second before dropping again. My road kit was in a green canvas duff wedged behind the toolbox. I pulled it out and unzipped it on the tailgate. Flashlight, the big mag light I'd already been using, still clipped to my belt. Multi-tool in a leather pouch, a roll of duct tape, a space blanket still in the wrapper, a first aid kit the size of a lunchbox, and the flare gun. I normally carried the flare gun for roadside accidents. Out in the middle of nowhere with no cell signal and no traffic, a flare was sometimes the only way to let someone know you existed. It was a cheap, single-shot thing, bright orange plastic, light enough to feel almost like a toy. The kit held 4 flares, each about the length and thickness of a shotgun shell. I picked it up and checked the chamber. Empty. I slid 1 flare in, then stuffed the remaining 3 into my jacket pocket. The gun felt awkward in my hand, unbalanced, but it was better than nothing. Christine was standing beside the Tahoe, staring down the main street. The siren hadn't stopped. "Let's move," I said. She nodded and started walking. I kept the flare gun low in my right hand. The mag light stayed in my left, still switched off. There was just enough fading daylight to make out the buildings as dark silhouettes against the sky. We passed Hotel Me on our left. 3 stories tall, gray wood, the porch empty. No movement in the windows. Christine walked a few steps ahead of me. She didn't glance to either side, didn't hesitate, just moved forward like she already knew the route. "Which building?" I asked. "We'll find it." That wasn't really an answer, but I didn't argue. The siren sounded louder now, though I couldn't tell if it was because we were getting closer or because it was echoing off the storefronts. It seemed to come from everywhere at once. Then I noticed the church. It sat on the right side of the street, set back about 20 feet from the other buildings. White clapboard siding, a small steeple, a cross at the top. A wooden sign out front read, Methodist Church Est 1864. The front door stood open, not unlocked open, wide enough that warm yellow light spilled out onto the dirt, candlelight. I stopped. Christine stopped with me. "You see that?" I asked. "Yes." The light inside flickered. Shadows shifted, though I couldn't tell whether it was just the candles or something else moving. "Stay behind me," I said. I stepped off the main path and crossed the open space toward the church. My boots broke through a thin crust of old snow, undisturbed. No footprints leading to the door, none around the building at all. The siren felt closer now, coming from somewhere deeper in town, beyond the church. I reached the doorway and paused, listening. Nothing, just the distant siren and Christine's breathing behind me. I clicked the mag light on, raised the flare gun, and stepped inside. The church was a single room, wooden floor, wooden walls, 2 rows of pews with a narrow aisle down the middle, a small pulpit at the front. 6 candles burned in iron holders, 3 on each side of the aisle. And mannequins. About a dozen of them sat in the pews. Men and women dressed in period clothing, long dresses, vests, buttoned shirts. Wax faces with painted eyes and stiff, lifeless expressions. The kind of display you'd expect in a preserved historical site, meant to show a Sunday service from the 1860s. But their heads were wrong. Every single one was turned toward the aisle instead of the pulpit, twisted at the neck, some at angles that looked painful even though they weren't alive. All of them staring toward the center, like they'd been watching something walk past, or like they were watching me now. I swept the flashlight across them. Their glass eyes caught the beam and gleamed. None of them moved. Of course they didn't, but someone had rearranged them recently. You don't build a historical exhibit like this, not with every head turned the wrong way. Christine stepped in behind me. I heard her boots on the wooden floor. "Leon," she said. I turned. She was staring past the pews toward the back wall. I followed her gaze and saw the message. Dark brown letters were smeared across the white boards above the pulpit, uneven, rough. Each letter maybe 6 inches tall, stretching across the wall. Keep to the bright below. The color looked like rust or dried blood. Probably paint. I hoped it was paint. Beneath the words, repeated 3 times in a neat vertical stack, was the symbol again. The circle with the line drawn straight through it, identical to the one smeared across the Tahoe's windshield. Same greasy brown color. I stood there staring at it, my thoughts lagging behind what my eyes were seeing. The mannequins twisted toward the aisle, the candles burning with no one around to light them. The message on the wall, keep to the bright below. Christine, we need to leave. She didn't respond. Her eyes were still fixed on the wall. Christine, it's a warning, she said. Her voice was quiet, flat. I don't care what it is. We're leaving. I backed toward the door, keeping the flashlight and the flare gun raised. The mannequins didn't move, but I didn't trust them. I didn't trust any part of this place. Christine followed, slow and deliberate. She kept staring at the words until we reached the doorway. I stepped onto the dirt outside and reached for the door, grabbed the edge and pulled. Nothing. I pulled harder. The door stayed open at the same angle, wide, unmoving. I planted my boots and yanked with both hands, the flare gun clenched in my right, the mag light pinned under my arm. Still nothing. It felt jammed or held. And then the siren stopped. It didn't fade out. It just ended, cut off mid-wail. The sound vanished so fast it left a sharp ringing in my ears. Silence dropped over the town, heavy, pressing, the kind of quiet that makes your chest feel tight and your breathing sound too loud. I let go of the door and stepped back. It stayed open. Candlelight still flickered inside. The mannequins were still turned toward the aisle. Christine stood beside me, staring into the church. I didn't speak. My hands were shaking. I tightened my grip on the flare gun. The silence pressed harder. I raised the mag light and moved faster toward the visitor center. The quiet felt worse than the siren. With noise, at least you know which direction to move away from. Christine walked ahead of me with that same steady pace she'd had all week. Not rushed, not cautious, just certain. That unsettled me more than I wanted to admit. I swept the flashlight across the storefronts as we passed the old assay office, a small cabin with a split-rail fence, everything boarded up or locked tight. I remembered the office building past the visitor center on the left, about 100 yards up. I'd stopped there a couple times over the past year to drop off maintenance reports. 1 story, green trim, a small porch. Christine glanced toward the narrow alley between the assay office and the next building. Just a quick look, then she kept walking. You see something? I asked. No. Then why'd you look? She didn't answer. I tightened my grip on the flare gun. The plastic felt flimsy, but it was something. 4 shots total if it came to that. Probably useless against a person, but the noise and light might buy time. There were more prints now. Boot treads crossing the street in different directions. Some older, edges softened by freeze and thaw, others sharp and fresh. I stopped and crouched beside one near the edge of the road. Hiking boot, Vibram sole or something close, modern tread, the kind you'd buy at REI. Leon. Christine stood about 10 feet ahead, waiting. Hold on. I shifted the flashlight and caught something else. A drag mark. 2 parallel lines about a foot apart, cutting across the frozen dirt from the alley toward the middle of town. Something heavy, pulled recently enough that the edges hadn't been softened by wind or dust. I stood and followed the marks with the beam. They ran about 15 feet before disappearing into a jumble of boot prints near the old freight office. Someone moved something, I said, or dragged someone. Christine looked at the marks without any visible reaction. "We need the phone. You see this?" "Yes. And it doesn't bother you." "Everything here bothers me." She turned and continued toward the visitor center. I followed her, because leaving her alone felt worse than whatever had made those marks. The visitor center was on the right now, a small building maybe 20 by 30 feet, white paint peeling from the siding, a hand-painted sign above the door read, "Bannock State Park Visitor Center. Welcome." The windows were dark. I reached the door first and grabbed the handle, cold metal. I turned it. The latch released, but the door only opened a few inches before it hit something solid. "Blocked," I said. Christine stepped up beside me. "From inside." "Yeah." I leaned my shoulder into the door and pushed. It scraped inward another inch, then another. Whatever was blocking it dragged across the floor with a metal-on-wood screech that made my teeth ache. I braced my boots and shoved harder. The door gouged into the frame as it forced open. Wood splintered, the frame bowed. The opening widened to about a foot. I could see into the building now. A breath of dark, icy air spilled out through the opening. I shined the mag light inside, letting the beam sweep across the room. A long counter ran along the left wall. On top of it sat a desk phone. Old beige plastic curled cord, the kind nobody's used in years. Near the doorway, a metal brochure rack lay tipped on its side. That was what had been blocking the door. The frame was bent slightly, the type meant to hold those folded pamphlets about park history and hiking routes. Someone had shoved it there on purpose. I pushed again and forced the door open just enough to slip inside. I went first, flare gun raised, flashlight cutting a narrow tunnel through the dark. The air inside wasn't just cold. It felt stale, old. It smelled like dust mixed with something damp, mildew maybe. The kind of smell that settles into a building when it's been closed up with no heat or airflow for weeks. I scanned the room with the light, the counter, a couple of chairs lined against the right wall, a coat rack standing empty in the corner. Behind the counter was a doorway leading to a back office. On the far wall hung a large corkboard, or at least it used to. A clean rectangle of lighter paint marked where a map had once been. 4 rusted screws still stuck out at the corners. The map itself was gone. Christine stepped in behind me. She didn't speak, just took it all in. I stepped over the fallen brochure rack and moved straight to the counter. The phone sat right where it should have been. I lifted the receiver and held it to my ear. Nothing. No dial tone, no hiss, just dead silence. I glanced down at the base. The phone line that should have run from the unit to the wall jack had been severed, cut clean through about 6 inches from the phone, not torn, not chewed, cut. Someone had used a blade. I set the receiver back down. Lines are cut. Christine stood near the doorway. She looked at the phone but didn't step closer, didn't even try to touch it. "You already knew," I said, "didn't you?" She didn't deny it. "How?" She turned toward the back door. "We need another building." "Christine." "One closer to the mine workings." That stopped me cold. "What mine workings?" "The old approach, past the creek." She said it like she was reciting directions, calm, certain. I aimed the flashlight at her face. She squinted but didn't turn away. "You told me you never been here before," I said. "You said that in the truck." "I haven't." "Then how do you know about the mines?" "I just do." There it was again, that same flat certainty. the same tone she'd used when she explained the miner's mark on the Tahoe. I lowered the light. Even through my gloves, my hands felt cold. This isn't right. I know. Then why are you? Because we're already here. She met my eyes. They were clear, focused. And someone needs help. I didn't have a response to that. She turned and walked toward the back door. It was a plain wooden door with a small window near the top. She pushed it open easily, no resistance at all. I followed because I didn't know what else to do. The back of the visitor center opened onto a narrow strip of ground between the building and a wooden fence marking the edge of the maintained area. Beyond the fence was scrub brush, and farther down the slope, the dark ribbon of a creek maybe 50 yards away. Christine stepped outside. I followed. I swept the flashlight over the ground. Boot prints, a lot of them, overlapping in places. Most were old, edges softened by wind and weather. But near the door, one stood out. Fresh, clean edges, deep tread. Vibram sole again. Same pattern as the print I'd seen near the drag marks. I crouched beside it. The print pointed away from the building, toward the fence and the creek beyond. Someone went this way, I said, recently. Christine stared down the slope. The trails past the fence. What trail? To the mine approach. I stood and followed her gaze. At first I saw nothing, just darkness, brush, the faint sound of water moving over rock. But the print was real, and it led that direction. I shut off the mag light for a moment and let my eyes adjust. The moon was up now, a quarter moon maybe, enough to see shapes, not details. There, a break in the fence line about 20 feet to the left, and beyond it, a worn path cutting down through the brush toward the creek. I switched the light back on and aimed it down the slope. The beam caught more prints, a whole line of them leading downward. Jesus, I said. Christine was already moving toward the gap in the fence. I caught up and grabbed her shoulder. Wait. She stopped but didn't turn around. We don't know what's down there. I know someone walked down there. Yeah, and maybe they didn't come back. She turned to face me. Her skin looked pale, too pale. In the spill of the flashlight, she looked thinner than she should have been. I could see the outline of her skull under her skin. We have to check, she said. We don't have to do anything. You saw the diaper bag. That hit harder than I expected. Yeah, I had seen it. A baby or a toddler somewhere in all of this, maybe with Susan Riley. Maybe not. I released my grip on her shoulder. Stay close, I said, and if I say we leave, we leave. She gave a single nod. I stepped past her and slipped through the break in the fence. The trail beyond was narrow, no more than 1.5 feet wide, a mix of dirt and rock. It dropped steeply toward the creek. I moved carefully, boots crunching on frozen ground, the mag light bobbing with every step. Christine stayed close enough behind me that I could hear her breathing. Near the bottom, the path flattened out. The creek was narrow here, maybe 10 feet across, moving fast. I could hear the water rushing over rocks even though the darkness hid most of it. I swept the beam to the left. The trail followed the creek bank for another 30 or 40 feet before bending and climbing again toward a dark hollow in the hillside. A mine approach, exactly like Christine had said. The opening was roughly 6 feet tall, 4 feet wide, framed by old timber supports. Gray, cracked wood, the kind that had been holding up Earth for a century or more. At the very mouth of the opening, smeared across the left support in the same greasy brown substance, was the symbol, the circle, the line through it. I stopped. Christine came up beside me. She saw it too. Bad air, she said quietly. Yeah. We stood there, staring at the mark and the darkness beyond. Then I heard something. Faint from inside the mine. A voice. The sound was low and distant, almost swallowed by the creek, but it was there. The trail hugged the water as I kept the light steady, sweeping it ahead. Christine's boots crunched behind me, close enough that I could hear her breathing over the rush of water. The path continued another 30 or 40 feet, before climbing again toward what looked like a mine entrance cut into the slope. I didn't like any of it. The beam caught something ahead, metal posts about chest high. I moved closer and the light revealed a section of fence, more suggestion than barrier, chain links sagging between rusted poles. A couple of warning signs hung crooked on the wire. Old signs, faded yellow paint, black lettering I couldn't read from here. I stopped about 10 feet out and raised the light. The nearest post was scratched deep through the paint, not rust, not weathering, scratches, intentional. I stepped closer and aimed the beam straight at the post. The symbol had been carved directly into the metal, gouged deep enough to cut through paint and bite into the steel underneath. Same mark as the Tahoe windshield, same one on the church wall. There, Christine said behind me, flat, no surprise. I didn't turn around. You knew it'd be here. I figured. That phrase again, like she was pulling answers out of thin air and didn't feel the need to explain them. I played the flashlight along the fence, more warning signs. I got close enough to read one. Danger, unstable ground, no entry. Below it another sign, historic site, authorized personnel only. Both hung at crooked angles, like someone had grabbed them and let go. Beyond the fence, the ground dropped sharply. Not a sheer cliff, but steep enough that you'd have to be careful. The beam cut down the slope and landed on timber and rock about 15 feet below. Another opening, maybe 6 feet across, framed by old support beams that looked like they'd been there since the 1800s. Just enough bracing to keep the hillside from collapsing while men dug beneath it. I aimed the light straight into the opening. It vanished. I had a good mag light, the kind that could throw a beam 200 yards on flat ground, but here it died after 10 feet, just black beyond that. Christine stepped up beside me. She didn't speak, just stared at the opening. We're not going down there, I said. Someone did. She was right. Boot prints showed clearly in the thin snow along the fence line. Same tread pattern as before. They led through a gap in the chain link about 6 feet to our left, then dropped down the slope. I moved to the gap and shined the light downward. The prints continued all the way to the opening, at least 2 sets, maybe 3, hard to tell where they overlapped. Then the beam caught something else. Small, bright blue. It sat on a flat rock, about 5 feet from the mine entrance. I leaned forward, squinting. Plastic. A bottle. One of those sippy cups with a twist-on lid and handles on the sides. The kind you'd pack in a diaper bag for a toddler. My chest tightened. I swept the beam to the left and spotted the second thing almost right away. A sock. Tiny, the kind meant for a 1-year-old. White fabric with small yellow ducks stitched into it. It was clean, no mud, no dirt ground into the fibers. It looked like it had been dropped recently, maybe an hour ago. The diaper bag in the Tahoe, the cooler with the juice box, Susan Riley's wallet sitting on the passenger seat. A child had been here. Leon. Christine's voice was quiet. I see it. I didn't want to go down there. Every instinct I had, the ones that had kept me alive in bad situations, was screaming to back away, get back to the main street, find another exit from this place. But if a kid was down there, if Susan Riley had brought her child to this godforsaken town and something had gone wrong, something shifted at the edge of the light. I snapped the flashlight up and caught it. Pale, standing about 20 feet beyond the mine entrance, just outside the deepest part of the darkness. The face. The same one I'd seen between the buildings on the main street. Skin so white it looked unreal, eyes flat and colorless. No pupils I could see, just white locked on me. Closer this time, close enough to tell it wasn't moving, not breathing, not blinking, just standing there in the beam like the light meant nothing to it. My hand started to shake. I shifted the mag light into my left hand and raised the flare gun with my right. "Get back," I said, loud enough to carry. The thing didn't react, didn't flinch. The eyes stayed on me, empty and fixed. I aimed low between us and pulled the trigger. The flare gun kicked harder than I expected. The shell struck the dirt about 10 feet in front of the figure and exploded into red sparks and thick chemical smoke. The light was brutal, too bright. It threw wild shadows across the slope and the old timber framing. The figure jerked backward. No sound. Just sudden movement, wrong too fast. And then it was gone. Deeper into the dark or around the side of the opening, I couldn't tell. The flare kept burning, maybe 30 seconds, long enough to bathe everything in that ugly red glow. And that's when I saw the other shape. Slumped against the right side of the mine entrance, half sitting, his back pressed to one of the old support timbers. A man. Dark jacket, jeans, boots. His head hung forward. His chest rose and fell in short, shallow pulls. I moved without thinking. Down the slope, boots sliding on loose rock and frozen dirt, mag light in one hand, the flare gun in the other, even though it was empty now. Christine called something behind me. I didn't stop. By the time I reached him, the flare was fading. I dropped to one knee and brought the flashlight up. He was around my age, maybe younger, short sandy brown hair, pale face, eyes half open and unfocused. His mouth hung slightly open as he gasped for air like he couldn't get enough of it. His right hand was pressed against his left thigh. There was blood. Not a lot, but enough to soak into his jeans, spreading dark beneath his palm. I reached for his belt and found a key fob clipped there. Rental car fob, same brand as the Tahoe. His wallet was shoved into his jacket pocket, torn along one edge like someone had yanked it hard. I pulled it free and flipped it open. Montana driver's license. Eli Riley, 33. Address in Bozeman. Same last name as Susan. "Eli," I said, loud and close to his face, "can you hear me?" His eyes shifted slightly. Didn't focus, but he reacted. "I'm getting you out of here," I said. His lips moved. No words, just a weak breath slipping out. I shoved the wallet into my jacket pocket and hooked my hands under his arms. He was lighter than I expected, or maybe adrenaline was doing the work. I dragged him away from the timber, away from the opening. His boots scraped the dirt. His head lolled forward. That's when the smell hit me. Faint, sour, wrong. It tightened my throat and made my eyes sting. The kind of smell you get in a basement that hasn't been aired out in decades, or in a mine shaft where the air has turned bad. I kept pulling, got him about 10 feet from the entrance before stopping to adjust my grip. His lips looked gray, not pale gray, like he'd been breathing something toxic and it was already in his blood. Christine stepped past me. I was still kneeling beside Eli, my hands under his arms, and she just walked around us like we weren't there. She headed toward the mine opening with that same steady pace she'd kept all night. Didn't look at Eli. Didn't ask if he was okay. Didn't ask if I needed help. Christine, I said, not loud, just her name. She didn't slow down. I watched her reach the mouth of the mine where the old timber supports framed the entrance. She placed one hand against the weathered wood, fingers spread flat. The last of the flare's red light washed over her profile and her face looked calm, focused, almost peaceful. That unsettled me more than anything else. "The message in the church," she said. Her voice was low but steady. "Keep to the bright below." She didn't turn around. "It means the only safe path is downward, where the old lights were." I stared at her back. What lights? Miners' candles, carbide lamps, they marked the safe tunnels. She leaned closer to the timbers. "That's where we need to go." She said it the same way she'd said everything tonight, like she was reciting facts, like something inside that opening had been calling her, and she'd already decided to answer. I released Eli and lunged for her arm. "We're not going in there." She tore free. "I'm not a small man. I've pulled fence posts, hauled sandbags, dragged heavy equipment through mud for over a decade. Christine weighed maybe 125 pounds on a good day, and lately she'd lost enough weight that her collarbone stood out under her jacket. She shouldn't have been able to break my grip. She did anyway. The force of it wasn't just surprising, it was wrong, like her muscles had been replaced with something denser, stronger. I stumbled back half a step before catching myself. "Christine, stop." She didn't respond. She reached for the timbers again, this time with both hands, leaning into the opening. The air shifted. That's the only way I can describe it. It grew heavier, like the pressure dropped or the oxygen thinned, or both. My ears didn't pop, but a dull pulse started behind my eyes, making the edges of my vision blur. I've worked at 12,000 feet before, on ridgelines where the air is thin enough that you have to stop every 20 steps just to breathe. This felt similar, only faster, worse, like the mine itself was pulling air in and refusing to give it back. I braced one hand against the rock wall to steady myself. My fingers trembled. The flare was nearly spent now, just a dim red glow, barely enough to see by. I blinked hard and forced my eyes to focus past Christine, deeper into the opening. That's when I saw them. More faces. Pale, flat, motionless. They stood farther inside the tunnel, maybe 15 or 20 feet back, grouped loosely together. 4 of them, maybe 5. The dying light didn't reach far enough to be sure. They didn't move, didn't blink. They just stared out at us with those same colorless eyes, waiting. My chest tightened. I raised the flare gun even though it was empty, my hand shaking so badly the barrel wobbled. It didn't matter. I needed to be holding something. "Christine, get back here, now." She ignored me. She was already halfway inside. I still had 3 flares in my jacket pocket. I dropped the mag light and fumbled one free with my left hand. My fingers wouldn't cooperate. The flare was cold and smooth, and I nearly dropped it twice before I managed to slide it into the breech and snap the gun closed. Just inside the entrance to the left was a loose stack of old timber supports, dry wood, probably 100 years old, the kind that would go up fast if you gave it a reason. I didn't aim at the faces. I aimed at the timber pile. I pulled the trigger. The kick hit just as hard as before. The shell arced upward and struck the stacked wood about chest height, wedging between two beams before igniting. The red chemical burn flared hotter this time, brighter, trapped in a tight space. The wood caught immediately. Dry timber burns fast when it hasn't seen moisture in decades. The fire raced up the stack in under 10 seconds. Orange and yellow flames mixed with the red flare glow, blasting heat and smoke out of the opening in thick rolling clouds. The pale shape snapped backward. Not smoothly. Not naturally. They moved the same wrong way the first one had, too fast, joints bending at angles that didn't make sense. Then they were gone, deeper into the tunnel, around a bend, or simply gone. Smoke poured out thick and acrid. I smelled burning pitch and something else beneath it, something chemical, old. Christine tried to force her way past the flames. She made it 3 steps before the heat drove her back. She raised an arm to shield her face, then stumbled backward out of the opening, coughing hard. For a second, I thought that was it. I thought she'd come back to me. She didn't. She turned and ran. Not toward me, not toward the path. She ran straight up the slope to the left, toward the gap between 2 buildings at the edge of the mine approach, and vanished into the smoke-choked darkness before I could even move. Christine, I called and took off after her, made it maybe 5 feet. Behind me, Eli made a sound, wet, choking. I turned and saw him sliding sideways off the support timber where I'd left him. His hand slipped from his thigh. His head tipped forward, then he dropped onto the dirt on his side. I froze. Christine or Eli. One choice, a couple of seconds to make it. I went back for Eli. I hooked my arms under his again and hauled him up. He didn't help at all. His legs dragged uselessly, his head lolled forward, his weight dead and pulling downward instead of balancing. I started dragging him toward the trail, back the way we'd come. My boots slipped on loose rock and frozen dirt as I fought for footing. That's when the alarm bell started again. It was faster now. The same low metallic clang, but the tempo had doubled. The strikes overlapped, climbing into that same rising, wailing siren. My head was still pounding, and the sound made it worse. I clenched my teeth and kept pulling. Then the lights came on. Weak yellow street lamps flickered to life above us. The old-style kind with curved glass and exposed bulbs. They blinked once, twice, then steadied, casting dim circles of light along the main street. I was sure they hadn't been on when we arrived. I knew that. But there they were now, glowing like they'd never been off. I dragged Eli up the slope. My shoulders burned. My boots slid again and again, but I didn't stop. The fence gap was 20 feet away, then 10. Then I was through it, back on the path between the visitor center and the fence line. The siren kept climbing. I hauled Eli to the back door of the visitor center, then past it, around the side of the building toward the main street. My lungs burned and my hands cramped, but I didn't let go. When I reached the street, I turned left toward the entrance road. The gate stood about 150 yards down, visible in the yellow lamplight. The same green tube steel, the same chain looped through the frame. But the padlock was open. I stopped and stared. The chain was still there, thick silver links, but the padlock that had been locked solid 15 minutes earlier now hung loose, open and unlatched at the end of the chain. I didn't question it. I dragged Eli faster. My phone was in my pocket. I let go of Eli with one hand and pulled it out. The screen lit up. One bar of signal, thin but real. I dialed 911, put it on speaker, shoved the phone back into my jacket pocket, and got both hands under Eli's arms again. I kept dragging while it rang. 4 rings. Then a woman answered, 911, what's your emergency? I'm at Bannock State Park, I said. My voice sounded rough, louder than I meant it to. I've got an injured man, leg wound, heavy bleeding. I need an ambulance. Now. Sir, can you tell me your exact location? Bannock, the ghost town off Highway 278. I'm at the entrance gate. I reached the gate and pushed through. The chain scraped against the post, but the open padlock didn't stop me. I pulled Eli clear and lowered him onto the frozen dirt outside the fence. The dispatcher kept asking questions. I answered as best I could. Yes, he's breathing. Yes, he's bleeding. Left thigh soaked through. No, I don't know how long ago, 10 minutes, maybe 15. I pulled off my work shirt, left the gray thermal underneath. Using my multi-tool, I tore the shirt into strips and packed the fabric against Eli's leg, pressing hard with both hands. Blood soaked through immediately. I didn't ease up. The dispatcher told me help was on the way, told me to keep pressure on the wound, told me to stay on the line. I stayed. Eli's breathing was shallow. His eyes were closed. I kept pressure on his leg and watched the entrance road. Headlights appeared maybe 12 minutes later. A sheriff's vehicle came in fast, red and blue lights flashing. It stopped about 20 feet away. The door opened and a woman in a deputy's uniform stepped out. Dark hair pulled into a tight bun, radio on her shoulder, utility belt heavy at her waist. I'm Deputy Morse, she said. She moved fast, dropping to one knee beside Eli and pulling a medical kit from her belt. What happened? Found him at a mine entrance, leg wound. He's lost a lot of blood. She didn't ask anything else. She cut away the fabric I'd packed, checked the wound, then applied a pressure bandage and cinched it tight. Eli didn't react. More headlights appeared. A white truck with a green stripe and a state park emblem rolled up. A man in a ranger uniform got out. Tall, maybe mid-40s, graying brown hair under a brimmed hat. Maxwell Diaz, he said, Park Service, what's going on? I told him everything, fast, clean. The open SUV. The slashed tires. The mine entrance. The pale faces. Christine running into the smoke. I didn't leave anything out. And I didn't try to make it sound reasonable. He listened without interrupting. When I finished talking, he looked over at Gloria Morse. She gave a single nod. We need fire support, Maxwell said. He lifted his radio. And search and rescue 2 missing persons, possibly more. Gloria was checking Eli's pulse. This one needs transport now. Maxwell called it in. I heard him request an ambulance, a fire crew, and additional units. He gave coordinates and described it as a possible structural fire with missing persons inside a historic site. The ambulance showed up 18 minutes later. The paramedics took over, loaded Eli onto a gurney, and prepared to move. Gloria rode with them to give her report. Maxwell stayed behind with me. 2 volunteers arrived in a red pickup, both wearing reflective vests and carrying flashlights. Maxwell briefed them in under a minute. I can take you in, I said. I know where she went. Maxwell nodded. Lead the way. I turned toward the gate. It slammed shut. I was still 5 feet away when it happened. The green tube steel gate swung hard on its hinges and smashed into the latch post with a metallic crash that echoed across the valley. Then the chain moved. It slid up the post on its own, wrapped around the frame, threaded through the latch, 3 smooth loops. The padlock snapped shut with a clean metallic click. No one touched it. No one was near it. The chain moved by itself. I grabbed the bars and pulled as hard as I could. They didn't move. The padlock was locked solid again. Maxwell stepped up beside me. He saw everything I did. The chain that had been open less than a minute ago. The gate that had just sealed itself. He didn't speak for a few seconds. Then he walked back to his truck and pulled out a bolt cutter. It took 4 tries to break a single link. The metal resisted more than it should have. When it finally gave, the chain dropped away and Maxwell shoved the gate open. "Stay here," he said. "I know where she went. You're a civilian, stay here." He looked back at Gloria, who had returned from the ambulance. "We'll find her." Gloria nodded. She had her radio and flashlight ready. The 2 volunteers fell in behind her. Maxwell went first. Gloria followed. The volunteers came last. I watched them walk up the main street under the weak yellow lamps. Their flashlight beams swept storefronts left and right. The siren was still sounding, that same rising, falling wail. They passed Hotel Me, past the church with the open door, kept moving toward the visitor center and the creek beyond. Then they turned past the assay office and disappeared from view. I stayed at the gate. The siren cut off mid-ring, just stopped, same as before. Silence settled in heavy and close. The street lamp stayed on, flickering slightly, stretching long shadows across the frozen dirt. I waited 5 minutes. Then 10. No one came back. I looked through the bars toward the mine approach. I couldn't see the entrance from here, but I could see the smoke. It was thinner now. A pale gray column drifting up into the night instead of the thick black roll from before. The fire was dying, or already out. I walked back to the state truck and climbed into the bed. Both driver's side tires were still flat, rubber sagging against the rims. I sat on the wheel well and rested the flare gun across my knees. 2 shots left, 2 flares still in my pocket. The town sat silent under the yellow lights. No movement, no sound. I thought about Christine reaching for the timbers, the way she'd torn free when I grabbed her, strength that shouldn't have been there. I thought about her running into the smoke instead of back toward me. I thought about the words in the church. Keep to the bright below. She'd gone down. Into the mine or past it or somewhere deeper, where the old lights were, where she thought it was safe. I didn't believe it was safe. I believed whatever had pulled Susan Riley out of that Tahoe, slashed the tires, cut the phone line, and locked the gates was still down there. Still waiting. And I believed Christine had walked straight to it. I sat in the truck bed and watched the gate. The chain hung tight in its loops, the padlock sealed, the bars casting long shadows across the frozen ground. Maxwell and Gloria and the 2 volunteers didn't come back. The smoke thinned until it was just a faint haze catching moonlight. I checked my phone. The single bar of signal was gone, just no service in the corner. I couldn't follow her. The gate was sealed, and even if I cut the chain again, I didn't know if it would let me through or slam shut the second I tried. I understood that now. Christine had gone somewhere I couldn't reach. And whatever had taken the Rileys, whatever left the diaper bag and the sippy cup and the tiny sock at the mine entrance, whatever carved those symbols and locked us in, it wasn't finished. It was still being fed. I sat in the cold with the empty flare gun in my hands and waited for someone to come back. Nobody did.